Also along our journey, we went to the Shepherd's Field, which is pronounced Beit Shahor, if I got that correct. It's a wonderful place. Now, the topography, while you think of a field, was more around hills and rocks everywhere. You literally had to pay attention to every step because it is an extremely rocky place. But there's a lot of history there. It's a Palestinian territory, and we got to experience some of what it is that they would journey through in order to get from one place to the next. And there was a church that we visited there as well.
A lot of the places that we went with, this is the first time we saw some caves where people were living inside of caves at the time. When you go into this shepherd's field, it's always something to remember that Jesus is the good shepherd. You find that in John 10. And there was a statue of a shepherd and some sheep there. And this place is the place where they say the annunciation to the shepherds happened. When the angels came and said, "Behold, I bring you good tidings of great joy that will be to all people, for unto you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, which is Christ the Lord." And so this place in Bethlehem and this area of Beit Shahor that's near Bethlehem is the holy place, because they believe that all of this announcement, all of this birth of the Christ child, all of that happened in this region. And that's why the church that's located there is called the Church of the Nativity. And it's a Greek Orthodox church.
This church had a variety of different displays that depicted the Nativity. Now, it isn't exactly what we would expect when we think of the Nativity. We're dealing in an entirely different landscape here, but it was good to see how others are experiencing, expressing that nativity moment, that moment where you find Mary and Jesus, the baby.
In this church, it was amazing. The art, in Greek Orthodox Church, they have iconography. They use icons. And so you would see on the pillars paintings of the patriarchs, the apostles. You would see these ornate displays of all of this gold and all of this brass, and these priests were coming through, and they were using this incense, and they were rushing us in and out of there because we were tourists. But they had these beautiful chandeliers everywhere, and it's just this display that they felt like we need to worship God with this ornate displays of his glory and his splendor. And even in that place, there was this one kind of like a little hole, and then a little a place where it was almost like they did a depiction of the manger with the Christ child. But in this one little hole with these lights around it, people were bowing down because they were saying that this is the actual place. Now, I don't know, sometimes the Greek Orthodox will say one place is the place, and then the Catholic Church will say something else is the place, but they were saying that this is the place where Jesus was born in a manger. And so people were bowing, and they were worshiping, and they were praying in these locations.
Now, this was extremely orderly as well, because this spot is very small. So it was one by one. You had to wait your turn, and people were literally going, and you could tell which religion was their faith based upon their rituals for praying. And then you could move through the rest. And as she said, the iconography is extensive. For my taste, it was actually overkill. I mean, they were everywhere, but it was a beautiful sight to see.
And as we were exiting this beautiful church, there was kind of like a wrought iron replica of Samuel anointing David as king in front of his father Jesse and all of his brothers. It was something, I know that Sherman just loves David. It's his favorite Bible character. And so I called him over and I said, "Sherman, look at this," because you got to see, this artist's rendition of this majesty and this consecration of the most noted king of Israel.
Yes, it was beautiful. You'll see the picture behind us at some point. But speaking of art, we also got to visit a Jewish business that was filled with woodworkings. Some of them from out of the country or around the country, while a lot of it was from one particular artist who was actually there in the store that we got to meet and discuss and hear him share his heart for his work. And I'm talking some of this the size of, well, let's just say you would have to ship it back to get it back home. All done by hand, all done with wood right there from the land, and it was beautiful. There were a couple of pieces I wish I could have brought back myself, but we didn't.
But we saw that, yesterday we talked about, or last time we talked about the Mount of Olives. All of these pieces were made out of olive wood. So in this tourist situation, you had some tourist kinds of things that were made from China and were very inexpensive and very almost cheap. But then you had this other art. One of the pieces that Sherman was looking at was a lion from the tribe of Judah. And it was a wonderful, it's just intricate display of this artwork. And it was worthwhile. They were up into the thousands, some of the pieces. And so if you ever go to Israel and you want to take something home, that's something that you could consider doing so.
Yes. Now, we did bring some trinkets back, as I'm sure all of you would love to have done if you were journeying there, but we brought back some olive oil as well, specifically from Israel.
So now we were going through the shepherd's field so we could see some of the terrain, some of the places that Sherman talked about where, a lot of this is desert and a lot of it is rocks. And so where in the rainy season, we had the best cucumbers, the best honeydew melons that I've ever had in my entire life. And so we had a rabbi, Judeman, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Judeman. And actually this rabbi, he's a younger guy, and he was from, I believe, Minnesota.
Yes,
Born in Minnesota, but one of the people who said, I'm going to go and return to the homeland. I'm going to go and return to Israel. And he had a lot of personal reasons for that. And he talked about some of those and some of the politics that were going on in the area, because now we're traveling through what we know as the West Bank, and we're going in all these Palestinian occupied territories. And so some of the tensions that were going on, he talked about that and why the Jewish people really wanted to make sure that they had a home state. And so he was really informative. And if you ever get to go there, that was some of the walking. We walked and we walked and we walked. But it was, hurting my feet. But then you got to think about back in the Bible days, they didn't have Nikes with cushions. They didn't have, the kind of shoes that we have now. And you just made you wonder, how were they able to traverse? Even though this whole entire land is the size of New Jersey, and when you go in there, you think of Jesus is moving here to Bethsaida, he's moving to Bethlehem, he's going from there, those are probably, 20 miles, 50 miles. It's not like going across the country that we would say in the United States, but it's still significant because it's hilly and rocky, and it is something to behold.
Now, you're probably wondering, so yes, we did have to go through armed checkpoints to move out of Jerusalem and into the West Bank community, but we didn't feel in danger at all. And it was an awesome experience to be able to see the transitions of the culture and the expressions that the other community was embracing as well, being authentic in themselves. And you'd also probably be surprised at how many of them, far more, are working and living together in different parts of Israel than what you particularly read about when it comes to the West Bank area.
Now, actually, we didn't have much problem. We were tourists. But one of our guides did have a problem. Rabbi Brad Hirschfield was wearing his kippah, which we would call a yarmulke here in the United States. And when we went through one of these checkpoints, he was warned that he needed to take them off or that trouble might come to him. So the police were wanting him to remove his Jewish covering in order to be able to be safe in the country. And in certain ways, that's similar to some of the treatment that we receive as African Americans here in the United States. And we'll talk a little bit more about that because we had a conversation about it later on in the day. But there's a lot that's going on behind the scenes. Even as we were there were protests of different kinds of political issues going on. And so there is a semblance of peace, but there's also a lot of tension.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic, because one of the things that we talked about, and we'll unpack this further, is that some of the concerns was for his own safety. It's like when I was in the military, and certain places we would go, you would not wear your uniform, even though you're a proud military person, because it just wasn't safe for you, even though you were proud to be who you were. And so it's that rub and that dynamics that we got to experience that's happening not just on the West Bank area, as Sadell mentions, but it's happening around the world.
So it's really interesting. You're here, you're in Bethlehem, place that Jesus was born. There's a chapel that was right there in Bethlehem. You're at the Church of the Nativity. Then you're traversing through this land. But now, all these holy places are there, but they're in Palestine territory. And you're going through and you're seeing the different soldiers with different regalia on from the different, sides. And, there's not a war going on right now, but not to the degree that there has been in the past, but it's still almost ripe for something to happen all the time. So then we went to lunch, and we went to a place, I want to say it right, Rami Levi Mall, Gush Etzion Junction. That's hard to say. And it's a mall that is in that West Bank situation, so you did have this guards and stuff, and there was stores there was a grocery store there, but we ended up eating pizza. And it was like New York style pizza, so I was very happy and filled with glee to have something that was kind of remembrance from home. So we were there and we had that experience.
Don't judge us.
Now, one of the interesting things is we were walking back from there, we saw what I'm going to call the dabbing Santa.
Yes. How he made it to Israel, I have no idea.
So Santa Claus was there, and we learned that while we celebrate Christmas on December the 25th, they celebrated the end of the first week of January. So it was like the 6th and the 7th, Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. And then the Armenian Christians
even further into
celebrated for the entire month of January. So there were still trees, there was still shopping, and their families were coming together even as we were there. So we kind of got an extended Christmas.
We really did. It was really awesome as well. It was festive, and you can imagine how it is in America when Christmas, those couple of days leading up to it. Imagine that happening in January in another country.
Yes, with trees and with ornaments, all the stuff that we had, they had the same stuff, but it was just a later time. And it was not just the 12 days of Christmas. Now you got 30 some days of Christmas. That was pretty awesome. And then on the same street, they had what they call stars and bucks.
Oh, yeah.
So they had these and it wasn't the only green coffee store that they tried to, imitate Starbucks, but this one was called Stars and Bucks. So I had to make sure I got a picture of that.
Yes, you'll see
Stars
that
and Bucks. Yeah, well. And coffee is as big there as it is here. And except for the coffee there, I don't drink coffee, and neither does he. But we were told that the coffee is much more not rich, but strong. But people were still drinking it.
Oh yeah.
So next place that we went to a rabbi and his wife's house. Rabbi Brad Hirschfeld has a brother named ZVI, and his wife is Dr. Dina Hirschfeld. They're both professors. They're both high intellects, and they brought the entire group into their home, which was in a settlement, which is like an Israeli colony inside the West Bank. And there's a lot of controversy there because some say that it's illegal for Israel to have this kind of colony there. And so they're kind of like protected militarily, and they also are in some sense kind of on the edge, but almost living there as a protest. Because everywhere you're going, you're finding out that people want to lay claim to this land or this part or this story or this account of Jesus, and they live inside the settlement.
Yes, it was interesting to see. It's actually a new dwelling, so the architectural and the construction is new, and going into their home was really a privilege and an honor. And we got to sit with them. They had pastries for us, and we heard some of their story about them also growing up in the U.S., but then moving to Israel and preparing to live the rest of their lives there and raising their family and their children there, and how even their children have, let's just say, as in America, their own identities as to how they want to view their Jewish heritage and history. And so all of them did not fall directly in line with their professor parents, who were very strict followers of Jewish practices.
Yeah, we had probably one of the more intense conversations there at the rabbi's house, really talking about this situation that had happened with his brother. One of our African American brothers who were there, who's a clergy person in Dayton, whose name is Don Fitzgerald, asked the question, because we had been there, and we as African Americans, we are generally aware that people don't often get to see African Americans when you go overseas, and they kind of maybe a little bit wary, even sometimes more than they might be here. And so Don asked the question whether or not he, as an African American, owns a barbershop, would be able to have a business in Israel, because they were talking about how important it was for them to have a state that was majority Jewish, and there was only 1 or 2% Christians inside of there, and that they were very the laws and the way that they did their immigration policies was very strict in order to keep that majority intact. And we were saying, well, we've been going through a little bit of our travels, and people are looking at us and they're following us when we go in the store, and now we've seen Rabbi Brad get followed by the Palestinian people. What's it really like here with all of these tensions? Would we be welcome?
Yes, and the question was answered yes, but then there are caveats, because in order to acquire Jewish citizenship, you have to have a Jewish lineage. Originally, in 1948, when they became a nation unto themselves, you had to only go back 2 generations, to your grandparents. But when we asked about us as non-Jewish in the more recent traditions, and going back further, like Ethiopian Jews who have heritage in Israel, in the Middle East, they said, well, it was later, it wasn't in 1948, and it's only been of recent, but they have been given access, and they're allowed to go back 7 generations to actually find Jewish lineage in their bloodline to then qualify as natural citizens. Now, out of the 8 million that are represented, there are only 40,000 that are Ethiopian Jews. So this has been a slow process. Not sure, there are mixed sides as to how open the process is, but we did have the discussion, and it was a little tight in the room, because we understand, and we made mention, I made mention to them my appreciation and sadness all at the same time, that they are so proud to be back in their natural heritage, yet we don't have that opportunity. We could get back to Africa, but not exactly to our actual native country, because there's just been too much distance and time and misinformation to know exactly where we come from.
Yeah, when the 14,000 Ethiopian Jews were brought into Israel, they were celebrating, but they still experienced discrimination. And just because of their color of their skin, and because they weren't, they were originally 587 BC was when the Ethiopian Jews began. But they were not welcomed all of the way as brothers, even in the land that they were coming back to. And it was so interesting because Rabbi Z was very impassioned. I asked about, hey, there are times when you're going places and they will say that you're welcome, but they will set up systems and structures, kind of like here redlining in the United States, that will make a way for the people that they don't want to be welcomed to not be welcomed. And he looked straight at me and with a very serious face and said, the Jewish people have been kicked out and knocked out and disenfranchised in almost every country of the world. So we have to have a place that we call home. And I was like, I'm not mad at you for that, because I, as an African American, feel the same way. And so some of this is what the class was all about, this methods of interreligious encounter, for us to be able to sit down with, to listen to see with our own eyes, the struggles of all of these different, pluralistic religions and the people that are represented by them, how they cope with being in this kind of war-torn zone, and how they hold on to their culture, their religion, their patterns of behavior. You know, it's so interesting. You hear the sounds of people, of the Islamic people praying at the 5 times a day. You see, you know, the Jewish people, the people who are Orthodox, and they're walking around, and it's just so amazing, but at the same time sad, because you want there to be peace, true peace in the world, and it's such a struggle. Especially
in what we call the heart of the Holy Land. And we know that from the Crusades and up to now, there's just been a constant fighting of taking ownership and possession of all of what this land represents. And we know that one day there's going to be a true reckoning of whose land it is. And when Jesus returns, there'll be no more question. So we thank you for watching with us. There'll be more to come about our experience in Jerusalem and Israel.